Right now, millions of American families are just flat out struggling to find housing at a price they can actually afford. It's a massive, growing crisis in cities and towns nationwide. And as the gap between incomes and the cost of housing keeps widening, local governments are scrambling to find solutions. So today, we're going to take a really close look at one of the most heavily debated local housing policies in play right now. In this explainer, we're unpacking a comprehensive report from the National Association of Home Builders, the NAHB. They took a hard, empirical look at a policy you've probably heard of in your own community. It gets touted a lot as a quick fix, but as we'll see from the data, researchers argue it might actually be the Trojan horse of housing policy.
And that brings us to the core question of our explainer. Are our so-called silver bullet policies actually making housing more expensive? We all want housing to be affordable, right? But we really have to ask if the very rules that are meant to help lower-income families are unintentionally widening that affordability gap, essentially squeezing out the middle class and creating less housing overall. Okay, let's dive into this and see what the evidence actually says.
Section 1. What is inclusionary zoning?
Inclusionary zoning, or IZ for short, is basically a requirement imposed by local governments. It forces developers to subsidize a certain percentage of affordable units right inside their new market rate developments. Now, it is absolutely crucial here to acknowledge the noble, good faith intent behind this. The goal is to create these beautifully integrated mixed-income neighborhoods and give lower-income households access to better services and schools entirely without relying on federal subsidies. On paper, it sounds like a wonderfully simple, elegant solution.
But, as we so often find in economics, intent doesn't always match up with reality. The NAHB report contrasts that idealized goal of affordable mixed neighborhoods with the harsh, empirical realities on the ground. They argue that IZ often leads to a reduced overall housing supply and higher market prices. According to the research, by trying to shift the public burden of affordable housing squarely onto the private sector, IZ sets off a chain reaction that fundamentally alters how housing is built and, more importantly, how it's priced.
Section 2. The hidden economic costs.
Let's break down exactly how that chain reaction works, because this is really the aha moment of this explainer. We get to see how a policy designed to lower costs might actually act as a hidden tax. An extensive study by the University of Maryland tracked the impact of IZ on housing production and prices, and what they found was that IZ raises the price of new homes by 2 to 3% and by as much as 5% for more expensive homes when you compare them to communities without these mandates. This is a massive finding. The middle class essentially gets squeezed out under IZ. They can no longer afford the market-priced units, which have been marked up to cover the cost of the subsidized ones, but they simultaneously earn too much to qualify for the affordable units themselves. It's a total catch-22.
And the impact goes way beyond just the sticker price. This hidden tax literally forces builders to change what they're building. That same study looked at data out of California and found a 7% shift away from single-family housing production over to multifamily housing. The cost burdens also mean that consumers of new housing are paying more for less space. The research showed the size of new homes shrank by an average of 48 square feet just so builders could make the math work.
So, the bottom line is captured perfectly in this quote from the University of Maryland study. Just like other taxes, the burdens of inclusionary zoning are passed on to housing consumers, housing producers, and landowners. Think about it. When a developer is forced to take a loss on 10 or 20% of a building, that money has to come from somewhere, right? It cascades down. Landowners get paid less for their property, builders construct smaller units, and the families buying the non-subsidized homes, well, they foot the rest of the bill.
Section 3. The administrative nightmare.
Now, the financial tax is really only half the story here. There is also a staggering bureaucratic tax. According to research from Burlington Associates, a jurisdiction that's trying to produce affordable housing at any real scale through IZ has to manage an absolute logistical maze. City staff have to oversee production to make sure affordable units perfectly match market rate ones. They have to calculate incredibly complex pricing formulas tied to median incomes. They run marketing campaigns. And we haven't even gotten to the selection process yet. They have to screen applicants, verify household sizes, wrestle with lenders because FHA loans often won't even underwrite deed-restricted properties, and then they have to micromanage the resale every single time a unit changes hands. Frankly, a lot of local governments just do not have the bandwidth, the budget, or the caffeine required to handle this level of oversight.
To really put this into perspective, look at this development, Capitol Quarter in Washington, D.C. Because of the sheer cost imposed by IZ mandates, builders had to get incredibly creative. See that corner unit right there? That is not one large home. That is actually 3 separate affordable units meticulously disguised as a single row house, just to fit the aesthetic of the neighborhood while still checking the boxes for the city's mandates. In other places, like out in California, builders have literally resorted to offering IZ units without kitchen cabinets or appliances just to keep the entire project from going completely bankrupt.
Section 4. Real-world IZ failures.
So what actually happens when cities push these mandates to the absolute limit? Well, let's look at Portland, Oregon. In 2017, Portland mandated that projects with over 20 units had to reserve 20% of them as affordable. The result? In 2018, which was the very first full year the policy was in effect, Portland saw a jaw-dropping 64% drop in multifamily housing permits compared to their historical average. It turns out, when you mandate a policy that makes building mathematically unfeasible, development just stops. The policy essentially led to a stagnation in the overall housing supply, which of course just drives rents up for everyone else.
San Diego faced a very similar reality check. A 2019 study analyzed some proposed changes that would raise their IZ mandates to 15% and require builders to pay prevailing wages. The projections painted a pretty grim picture for affordability. Rents for market-rate apartments were projected to jump by $735 a month. New home prices up 19%, and overall housing production would plummet by 32%. In that scenario, researchers projected destroying over 1,700 market-rate units just to gain a mere 10 additional affordable units.
In fact, the negative impacts documented in the NAHB report were so severe that several cities just completely abandoned the policy altogether. Take Madison, Wisconsin. They saw new construction drop by 40% after passing their IZ ordinance. That caused vacancy rates to drop and citywide rents to climb, which is the exact opposite of what they were trying to do, so they terminated the program. St. Cloud, Minnesota experienced the exact same thing. They built a total of 28 homes in 5 years under the program, mostly because buyers completely ignored the restricted units in favor of existing, non-restricted homes. They abandoned the policy entirely too.
Section 5. Better paths to affordability. Okay, so if IZ mandates are missing the mark, what does the NAHB report actually suggest? Well, the research highlights several proven, non-federal strategies that cities are using really successfully today. Instead of strict mandates, they found that the most successful cities use powerful incentives to help close the developer's financing gap. We're talking about carrots instead of sticks. Things like expedited permitting, which limits the number of days a project sits in review, saving builders massive carrying costs, or fee reductions, where the city waives impact or utility connection fees. And density bonuses, which allow builders to construct more units on a given piece of land than the zoning normally allows. That naturally helps them offset the costs of offering units below the market rate.
Another brilliant way to achieve affordability naturally is by simply changing what it's legally permissible to build. Take a look at Luminara, a parasol park. By diversifying housing options and allowing for what's called missing middle housing, so townhomes, duplexes, smaller lot configurations, communities can increase discrete density. This naturally lowers the barrier to entry for a buyer, totally bypassing the need for complex government subsidies or heavy deed restrictions.
The big, overarching theme from the successful case studies in the report is collaboration, not coercion. The projects that actually got built and successfully lowered housing costs relied heavily on strong public-private partnerships. In some cases, municipalities even donated vacant or underutilized city-owned land just to lower those initial development costs. They utilized strategic upzoning and focused really heavily on high design standards to ensure the new housing benefited the whole neighborhood without tying up production in red tape.
So what you should really take away from all this is that the housing affordability gap is a deeply multidimensional problem. It requires comprehensive, thoughtful strategies, not quick fixes. Which leaves us with a pretty critical question to consider. Is your local government relying on the silver bullet of inclusionary zoning, or are they actually doing the hard, collaborative work of comprehensive planning to build the housing your community really needs? Definitely something to think about the next time a new housing policy makes the local headlines. Keep learning, keep asking those tough questions, and thanks so much for joining me on this explainer.